Hi, everybody. Welcome to the last session of our Young Researchers Workshop on Terrorism and Belligerency, focused on human enhancement and advanced technologies in terrorism and belligerency. I'm Ido Rosenzweig. I'm Director of Research at the Minerva Center for the Rule of Land and Conditions on Terrorism and Belligerency. In this workshop, we have several young researchers present their work related to our topic. And for each presentation, we have a designated respondent, which allows them to get a good response on what they've been working on. Every presentation is about 20 to 30 minutes long, and the following response is about 15 to 20 minutes long. And following that, we open the floor for Q&A and general discussion over the topic between the participants of the workshop. If you want to see further videos and presentations of this workshop and other videos of the Minerva Center, we stream live and we record every presentation that we have, and we upload it later on to our YouTube channel. So if you subscribe to our YouTube channel, you will be able to see all of our presentations. And on with this session. In this session, we're going to have Dr. Agata Kleczkowska, an assistant professor at the Institute of Law Studies of the Polish Academy of Sciences. Her research interests include, but are not limited to, the threat and use of force, hybrid threats, statehood recognition, and restoration. Her respondent, Dr. Yahli Shereshevsky, is a new faculty member at the Faculty of Law, University of Haifa. He was a postdoctoral fellow with us at the Minerva Center for the Rule of Law and Conditions in the year 2018-2019, and he is an international lawyer, and his research is focused mainly on international humanitarian law, international lawmaking, the use of force, and international criminal law. The topic of Agata's presentation is the implication of use of autonomous self-defense systems. Agata, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Let's start with a small introduction. It is too early to speak about arms race between states in the context of autonomous weapons. However, largest arms producing states, including the USA, the UK, France, Russia, Italy, Japan, Israel, Germany, South Korea, India, and China, already assume that robotic technologies will contribute to shaping the future of warfare, and that the acquisition of such technologies, particularly unmanned aerial systems, should be a priority. Autonomous weapons are considered to have especially high value when used in missions that require speed in decision-making, analysis of heterogeneity and volumes of data, when the mission is dangerous, or when the persistence and endurance are required. Even though that could be the traits of the super warrior ready to conquer every stronghold, operations with the use of autonomous weapons tend to be rather defensive than offensive. On what grounds, then, states should be allowed to use autonomous weapons in self-defense? How autonomous weapons fit into the traditional criteria of self-defense? What about the responsibility if the legal framework of self-defense will be violated? This is the aim of this paper, to answer these questions. However, before moving on to the analysis, it is indispensable to define the scope of this presentation. Its aim is to discuss selected aspects of self-defense in relation to autonomous defense systems which are out of human control. In general, one may assume that it is possible in two cases. When it comes to the first one has to start from saying that the term autonomous system is a broad category that refers to three types of systems, depending on the degree of human control over machines: semi-autonomous operations, supervised autonomous operations, and fully autonomous operations. The presentation focuses on this very latter category. In fully autonomous operation, human operators pre-program machine but do not choose specific targets. Once the machine is activated, it will select and engage targets on its own on the battlefield. Human operators are not able to supervise the operation and correct the machine's actions in sufficient time in case of the system's failure. That is why this type of the control is called human out of the loop. As to the second case, apart from systems where human operators were deliberately deprived of control over machines, it may also happen that human operators will lose control due to a failure or breakdown over machines. That situation is also within the scope of interest of this presentation. I argue that states remain fully responsible for the functioning of autonomous systems as they may pre-program them according to their policies. On the other hand, autonomous weapons, even if they have incredibly broad possibilities of actions, are not able to replace humans in every case, as many of the traditional criteria of self-defense require sensitivity and experience that only humans have. The first part of presentation refers to the criterion of necessity vis-à-vis the autonomous weapons carrying out self-defense. Secondly, I will discuss the issue of anticipatory self-defense in autonomous weapons. And finally, I will refer to the question of responsibility in case of violation of international law in a result of the use of autonomous weapons. So to start with, the submission of the exercise of the right of self-defense to the conditions of necessity and proportionality is a rule of customary international law. Out of these two criteria, it seems that in the context of autonomous weapons, the criterion of necessity can be especially problematic. One may enlist a few components that make up necessity as a condition of legal self-defense. It is worth to analyze them and refer them to the situation when it is the autonomous weapon which sets the target and uses force in self-defense. Firstly, self-defense has to be ultima ratio. To put it differently, there must be no choice of means. State must have no other means of halting the attack other than recourse to armed force. Thus, this condition is not fulfilled and consequently self-defense is illegal. If a state could halt the attack using such peaceful measures like admonition, protest, or diplomatic representation, it could offer arbitration or use the procedure of settling disputes provided by the international organization it belongs to. How an autonomous defense system, a weapon designed for the armed answer, is going to consider whether, instead of using force, diplomatic solution was possible or states could solve the dispute in the court, such arrangements can be only made between humans after hours of negotiations by skillful politicians, a field where even the smartest machines will not be helpful at all. The second component would be the requirement of immediacy, which refers to time when the attacked state will launch the repulsive action. The longer the period between the armed attack and the response, the more pressure there will be on state concerned to resolve the matter by peaceful means. Immediacy is also important as the more time elapses between the armed attack and the reply to it, the harder it will be to distinguish between the self-defense and the illegal reprisals if the state still decides to react militarily. Usually, the autonomous systems will fulfill this criterion flawlessly, as the speed of reaction is one of their biggest assets. Thus, they will react to an armed attack without delay. Thirdly, there is the criterion of exclusive purpose. Undertaking measures must be of genuinely defensive character that is designed to put an end to an armed attack. One may bind this criterion with the requirement to choose adequate targets to repel an armed attack. States deciding about self-defense in smoked field rooms sometimes choose to attack not the immediate source of an armed attack against the state, but such objects on the territory of the adversary that are especially sensitive or valuable to that state. As long as such choices change the reply to an armed attack from self-defense to reprisals or even aggression, whether the autonomous system will target the source of an arm attack in order to put the attack to an end, or whether the reply will have the character of the punishment, will depend on how it was programmed. Even though, as mentioned, such systems choose the targets on their own, they are the people's products. So people give them indispensable data, even though these are machines which later decide about the use of this data on their own. Summing up, whether the use of autonomous weapons would fulfill the criterion of necessity would mostly depend on how they would be pre-programmed, what in turn depends on the policy adopted by states. Nevertheless, even if the programming would take into account the criterion of immediacy or the exclusive purpose and adequate target, at the end, the autonomous weapon may still have problem of proper assessment of the situation as requiring the use of force and leaving no choice of other peaceful means. I will now discuss anticipatory self-defense exercised by autonomous systems. For the purpose of this presentation, I will assume that anticipatory self-defense refers to the use of force in case when the arm attack has not started yet, but may be launched at any moment in the future. First of all, one has to start from a general remark that even though autonomous systems undertake decisions without the human interference, these are people who decide about the information that machines have at their disposal in the course of the operation. Thus, again, it is only the state's policy approach adopted towards the anticipatory self-defense that will be decisive when it comes to the pre-programmed parameters used by the machine when assessing whether to strike first or not. Secondly, if to allow self-defense due to the possibility of the imminent arm attack, the demonstration that there was actually a pending attack would be crucial for the legality of self-defense. On one hand, autonomous systems can gather much more information than soldiers or human operators, which can be useful to justify the anticipatory self-defense. On the other hand, some autonomous systems may be based on the fire and forget technology. That includes, for instance, Israeli Harpy drones. The data recorded during the strike of the drone are destroyed during the next bombing. Thus, if another unit of Israeli forces did not record the drone's data as well, the state will lack the proof of the legality of self-defense. Thirdly, if to allow autonomous weapons for anticipatory self-defense, there is no guarantee that even the most sophisticated system will not make the fatal mistake. During the Operation Iraqi Freedom, the Patriot system, which was used as a defense against tactical ballistic missiles, recognized 3 times coalition aircrafts and the USA aircraft as hostile objects. Even though Patriot system is not fully autonomous, human operators did not fix the errors of the systems as they were trained to trust it. If the presence of humans does not guarantee the verification of targets, the machines themselves can also be vulnerable to fatal mistakes. Taking it all into account, whether or not autonomous defense systems will exercise anticipatory self-defense depends on the policy adopted by states that will program them. Nevertheless, even this brief account shows that that kind of actions requires analysis and decision-making that may excess the limits of parameters recorded on the machine's hard drive. The question remains, who bears responsibility for violations of international law if the action carried out by the autonomous system exceeds the legal framework of self-defense? It is self-evident, as observed by the USA, that machines are not states or persons under the law, so they themselves cannot be held responsible. Instead, responsibility should be attributed to one of the remaining actors, states or human beings. But which model of responsibility would fit best the specific situation of autonomous weapons? Several proposals were formulated in the doctrine of law. Firstly, If systems discussed in this presentation belong to the category of the so-called human out-of-the-loop operations, there are engineers who pre-program them and decide about some basic parameters which the systems use, even if machines choose this data autonomously. Potentially, such systems can integrate more information from more sources far faster than a human possibly could in real time. Thus, the designers of the systems and the engineers could build in a mechanism that would make the systems assess the action under jus in bello or jus ad bellum, or at least it would assess the action from the perspective of risk of harm for the civilians. To put it differently, even if the system does not need human when choosing the target and firing the missile, it is an engineer that decides about the parameters and overall scope of information that would be taken into account by the machine. That is why persons programming or designing autonomous systems may be held responsible for the violations of international law committed in a result of the functioning of these machines. While on the object of individual criminal liability, the model of responsibility of superior military commander over subordinate is sometimes invoked. The basic conditions for the responsibility of the superior are provided by Article 86, Paragraph 2 of the first additional protocol to the Geneva Conventions. According to that provision, there are 3 conditions under which superior may be held liable for the violations committed by his subordinate. There must be a relation between the subordinate and the superior, de jure or de facto. The superior knew or should have known that his subordinate committed a violation or would do it. And superior did not take all feasible measures he was able in order to prevent and repress such breach. Some propose that the superior responsibility could be also applicable to describe the responsibility of humans over autonomous systems, but it does not seem that this mode of responsibility fits well to this specific situation. Human operator does not have effective control over autonomous systems, as he cannot in real time influence the decisions about their targets. He may have de jure control over autonomous systems and take all feasible measures to prevent the breach on the level of programming, but he has no impact how the system will assess the specific situation. All the more, he has no influence over the breakdown of the system. He has no chance to find out about the planned violation of international law, as autonomous systems do not plan breaches as they are deprived of free will. He will eventually find out about the violation that has been committed, but how can he repress the system? The concept that mostly overlaps with the model of the superior's responsibility is the criminal negligence. Criminal negligence is engaged if the person in superior authority knew or had reasons to know that his subordinates were about to commit or had committed crimes and yet failed to take the necessary and reasonable steps to prevent or repress the commission of such crimes or to punish those who had committed them. Thus, this statement practically reiterates the content of Article 86, Paragraph 2 of the first additional protocol. However, it should be clarified that not every case of negligence is criminal. The negligence must be so serious that it is tantamount to malicious intent. Given that, criminal negligence cannot have the application to the case of control over autonomous weapons for the same reason as a superior's responsibility, as well as because it requires employment of additional criterion, which is specific only for humans' behavior. Fourthly, if a person held responsible for the violation of international law in the course of functioning of the autonomous weapon had the status of state organ, in accordance with the internal law of the state, was empowered by the law of that state to exercise elements of governmental authority, or its conduct may be attributed to that state on any other grounds, then the state becomes responsible for the violation of international law that was the result of the operation of the autonomous system. Finally, Rebecca Krutov proposes an innovative approach to the discussed issue, suggesting the use of the tort law. She claims that this regime, normally governing non-contractual civil wrongs for which an individual can seek redress, offers means of regulating valuable but inherently dangerous activities and compensating injurious wrongs, and that is why it's able to fill in autonomous weapons system accountability gap. She calls tort law, which refers to the responsibility deriving from actions carried out by autonomous weapons, as war torts regime. Out of all models of responsibility, it seems that the model of individual criminal liability of designers and engineers is the most suitable one for the specific situation of autonomous weapons. In addition, their conduct can be also attributed to the state, as they are creating the autonomous system for the state on the state demand, according to the parameters ordered by the state. Krutov's proposal also seems very interesting. Nevertheless, it does not seem that states are ready to adopt this new regime of responsibility. Concluding, the mode of operating of autonomous weapons mirrors the policy adopted by a state. No matter if the anticipatory self-defense or specific components of the criterion of necessity are at stake, it is a state that owns and uses the autonomous weapons as well as chooses how it wants them to be programmed, even if it cannot further influence their actions. Thus, the use of autonomous weapons should not be treated as a convenient excuse for a state to cut itself off the responsibility for the use of force carried out by such machines by equating their autonomy with being nobodies. States bear responsibility for autonomous weapons on two levels, because they acquired such specific, difficult to control weapons, and for the way they pre-programmed them. Even if the detailed regime of the responsibility has not yet been established, it does not mean that there is a legal vacuum, as states are still bound by norms of the use of force in international humanitarian law, which are applicable to all their actions, including those involving autonomous weapons. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Agata. Now we move to the response by Yahli.
Well, thanks, Agata, for a really interesting paper and presentation. So let me just raise several points of consideration since this is clearly still a work in progress. I want to start by congratulating you on the topic that you chose, which is much less studied than other questions regarding autonomous weapons, mostly core conduct of hostilities issues. So I think that the question of the use of force conducted by autonomous weapons is extremely interesting, and there's much to think about in this relation. I want to offer maybe 4 or 5 points for your consideration. The first is, what exactly are we talking about when we discuss fully autonomous defense systems? What is the context? What do these systems do? It seems that you, from your paper, that you focus on autonomous weapons or autonomous defense systems that are responsible to the entire response of the state. So you discuss right necessity, proportionality, and when it comes to jus ad bellum, this is the whole military campaign. However, when I think about autonomous systems or defense systems, the first thing that comes to mind are things like the Iron Dome system, assuming that it will function fully autonomously. And these systems, they identify a specific attack, for example, a rocket that is being fired towards the state, and they respond towards this specific attack. They're not responsible for initiating the full-fledged military attack that follows this initial attack. And I assume, where does this system fall into your analysis of jus ad bellum? right? I would think that it's much easier to program these systems to operate in a way that is necessary and proportionate. The second thing is just a small point. You suggested that necessity is more problematic than proportionality, and therefore, as a result, you discuss in the paper necessity in depth, but you do not discuss proportionality. And I wonder why is this the case according to your position? To me, it seems that it's extremely difficult to apply, to think about proportionality in use in bellum and use ad bellum, right? What exactly is proportionate attack? There are multiple open questions in legal literature about proportionality in use ad bellum, and I wonder why don't you think that it's a really complicated question, and I would love to hear your thoughts about how to apply proportionality to this defense system, assuming that they are responsible for a broad response to the initial attack. The third point is that, again, it seems that you assume that the autonomous weapon operates alone, right? Because in the discussion within the paper, you suggested there will be cases in which it will be extremely difficult to gather evidence on what information or data was available to the autonomous system, since it will be destroyed when operated. But I assume that that it might be even more often the case that this system operate together with other various systems that store the information, the relevant, that is relevant to the operations of the system. And I wonder whether it changes your analysis. In this regard, I think that it will be really beneficial for the paper to address Dick Slubel and Mary paper on autonomous weapons or AI and use of force. Indeed, the paper is broader than your discussion because you focus solely on fully autonomous weapons, and they also discuss decision-making systems or systems that are tasked with providing information when it comes to use ad bellum. But I do think that much of the discussion strongly relates to the point that you discuss in your paper. It will be interesting to see to what extent you agree or disagree with the positions of, with their positions in their paper. And the last issue is responsibility, and specifically criminal responsibility. You suggested that the best path might be to focus on the responsibility of the developers of these systems. And I wonder, what's your position regarding the demand for intent in most international crimes? I did not see it in the paper, maybe I missed it, but it seems to me that it will be extremely difficult to establish criminal intent of the developers of these systems. You do address some areas where intent is less relevant in international criminal law, especially superior responsibility, but it will be extremely difficult to argue that the developers have some kind of superior responsibility in relation to these systems, and I wonder how do you solve the problem of intent. And maybe more importantly, it's true that the discussions that you bring when it comes to responsibility are the main discussions on responsibility and AI, but you focus here on use ad bellum, and the relevant crime for use ad bellum is aggression. And we know that under the crime of aggression, those who are responsible is a person in a position to effectively exercise control over or to direct the political or military action of a state, namely really high-ranking officials or military commanders. And I wonder again how this falls into your discussion of criminal responsibility for the use of these defense systems. So thanks again for a really interesting paper and presentation, and good luck with the project.
Thank you very much. It was very, very useful. Let me start from asking, could you please repeat what article you mentioned, because I didn't hear it well?
There's a paper by Ashley Dix, Noam Lubel, and Dara Mary on AI and use of force.
Okay, I know this paper. Then I will go through it and definitely use it. Okay, thank you so much again. Starting from the beginning, I guess. I guess I really didn't distinguish between different types of autonomous weapons, but yes, you're right. I should maybe emphasize whether I'm referring to these DOM systems or whether I'm referring to any kind of autonomous weapons that are used in military. I will definitely pay attention to that, because I thought about this more overally, and I didn't make any particular distinction. When it comes to the proportionality, I somehow knew that it will be one of the most controversial points of the paper, because when I thought about the autonomous weapons and self-defense necessity, was the first criterion, problematic criterion that sprang to my mind. As thinking about the use of force as ultima ratio and autonomous weapons, that seem to me to not go along very well. But yes, absolutely, you're right. Proportionality is also problematic, and I definitely agree that the autonomous systems may also have problem with this. I did not include it, maybe because I assume that it's easier for the machine, which has some kind of pre-programmed parameters, to assess the scale of the attack and maybe adjust the response to the attack. And that is why the proportionality should not be that problematic. But when I'm thinking about it now, yes, you're right that I should also add proportionality in this, and I will definitely add it to the article at the end. When it comes to the gathering information with other systems, when I wanted to focus just on the situation when the autonomous systems are the only one that are operating within certain field and are responsible for the defense. I can imagine that they are not completely like derived from all the other state apparatus, and they are operating within some wider context of other apparatus and appliances used by the AI appliances used by the state. But I wanted to focus just on the autonomous systems, but perhaps I should be more clear in that in my paper, and I should either write at the beginning of my paper some disclaimer on that, or I should somehow explain it. When it comes to the responsibility, I did not mean that I would like to use the superior's responsibility to make the developers of the autonomous weapons responsible under international law. I treated it as two different models of responsibility, actually, and it suggested that they may be used to hold someone responsible for the crimes committed in the result of the operation of autonomous weapons. Nevertheless, I think that it would be possible to attribute the engineers or designers of the autonomous weapons with the intent to pre-program them in a way to be more not, for instance, use force proportionally, or to target the more vulnerable or sensitive places in the territory, in the enemy's territory. So I think that I don't mean under international criminal law. I'm not talking now about international criminal law. I mean maybe more under domestic law, because I think it's another story when it comes to the international criminal law. And but I mean, yes. And when it comes to the crime of aggression, absolutely, you're absolutely right. I miss it in my paper. The violation of the use of force is the crime of aggression, and I will definitely add it, and I will consider whether it is possible to attribute the responsibility for crime of aggression because of the crimes committed in the result of the functioning of the autonomous weapons. So thank you. These are some very, very helpful remarks, and I definitely will take them into account. And I feel like I'm ready now to sit down and adjust my paper, because I'm really inspired by your response. Thank you.
Thank you, Yahli. Thank you, Agata. And now we move to the section of open discussion. I will begin. The question of proportionality was a big question for me as well. I think that even if you assume that the machine can understand necessity, there is a big question of how do you evaluate proportionality, and to what extent, against what is the measure that you analyze proportionality according to. Having said that, I don't think that necessarily the machine is that stupid. If we assume that we're talking about fully autonomous machine, and we assume that it operates on artificial intelligence to some extent, right? We're not talking about putting a landmine across the border or something like that, which is to some extent also autonomous, because you leave it and it explodes when it feels enough weight on it. We're talking about something that actually makes a decision whether to shoot and whether not to shoot, and can identify certain aspects. Now, Yahli touched that, the fact that an autonomous weapon can be part of other defense mechanisms. But I would also argue that if we assume that a machine is that smart, with the lack of, or sophisticated is a better word, it doesn't mean that we cannot still put information to that machine. You know, the fact that it would make its own decision and we don't decide when it's going to shoot or not shoot, when it's going to respond to an attack, it doesn't mean that we cannot provide it with more current information about the threat, about the abilities of the adversary, the potential adversary, the abilities of our systems, and help it make a smarter decision, a more educated decision. Now, if we go through the notion of autonomous weapons and artificial intelligence, game theory has a big part of the development of those systems. Now, if through game theory, a machine can defeat a chess player on one-on-one, and we've seen them doing very, very sophisticated things, I'm not sure that we won't be able to reach to the point where that autonomous machine will actually make a better self-defense decision than a human. I mean, that machine might have a better understanding of what are the intentions of the enemy and what are the abilities of the enemy before deciding whether to strike or not. Another point is the fact that you don't relate to the notion of cross-border incursions. There is a use of force between states that goes underneath the threshold of use at will. And it really depends on what the machine will be doing. What is the intensity of that machine? What its capabilities with the use of force, and whether that use of force actually constitutes an armed attack in accordance to the notion of use ad bellum. And there is a lot of talk about what is that threshold. There's a lot of writing about that threshold, and we ought to take that into account, because if I'm going to put that machine, and I know that its response as a standalone machine will be underneath that threshold, or I assume it would be underneath that threshold, then I don't care when it's going to operate. It's going to be some problem, but it's not going to be a use ad bellum problem. It's not going to be an act of aggression. So I think that apart from the general theoretical question of what happens if, and then you eliminate all the options I just referred to, and referred to basically that we have such a machine, it's smart, but not that smart. It has significant power, and it will use that power whenever it decides to. Then there is the question of the necessity and proportionality, of course. But even then, it was my decision to put it there. So knowingly, I know that what is its capabilities. I know whether or not what it is the abilities of its firepower. And then it is my decision to put it over there. Now, with regard to the attribution or the affiliation to the engineer, to be honest, I don't see that happen for several reasons. And I know that we're moving from state responsibility to individual responsibility. I get that notion. But it depends who developed that system. That's one. It depends what was it, how was it developed? Was it developed by a private company, or was it developed by a state? Was it developed by a private company outside? I just purchased it. It's one thing. If it was purchased, it was developed under my instructions and guidance, it's a completely different thing. Because, and I'm saying that using, as much as Leah used her previous hat from the field, I'm using my previous hat as a computer programmer. I've had enough working hours, enough code lines to say that that person just received a section to write and develop. He doesn't know, she doesn't know what will be the purpose of that to that extent. You know what a part of the system. So you go one step further than that. You go to the designer of the program. You go to the one step before that to the person who ordered the program. It's almost impossible to reach to one person that will actually be liable for that, unless you go for general corporational responsibility. However, if it was a state that designed that, you might have a better understanding, but still almost impossible to reach to one person that would be responsible for that. Now, regardless of both of these options, are there under IHL, if I purchase a new weapon, or I'm going to use a new weapon, or just develop a new weapon, I have to test it. I have to make sure that it operates in accordance to the laws of war. Now, if you want to expand a definition of the laws of war, as it's done in the US, for example, which includes also use of bello and use in bello combined, then every weapon, every self-defense weapon that I might be using is relevant, especially if you accept the notion that an armed conflict begins from first shot fired, then of course I have to make sure that this weapon works in accordance. So I have to know exactly how it works. I have to know exactly what it is capable to do. So I have that responsibility from that perspective. Even if it's a new weapon or I designed it, I have to know exactly what that weapon is capable to do. And unless we're talking about super futuristic weapon that can actually teach itself and change completely the code lines it's been given, at the end of the day, I know, or I should be able to know, what that machine is capable for. So if I know that, then there is no need for that entire threshold of, or entire line of going through everyone to the engineer, and I go back to the person who placed the weapon at either in my territory or most likely my territory, because we're talking self-defense. I think that's it.
Thank you. You're a practitioner, so that's obviously you know better. But I will definitely take it into account. I thought about the responsibility of designers and engineers because I thought that that maybe manufacturers are only giving you a product with like carte blanche, and only then the designers and engineers put inside, like you said, all these codes, and that is why they are more responsible for creating and maybe shaping the data that the autonomous weapons are using, and they are capable to have. That's why I know that the responsibility of manufacturers is also considered in the literature, but I thought that the responsibility of designers and engineers seems more plausible to me. But I will definitely reanalyze it. When it comes to the cross-border incursions, definitely this is a very this is a distinct topic, and this is very interesting. And you're right, this is a more practical field than the more theoretical analysis that I have in my paper. And it will be very interesting just to go through it and to analyze it. And I always thought about cross-border incursions in the categories whether they cross the threshold of the use of force, and I didn't even think if they cross the threshold of an armed attack against a state. But yes, some states consider that also cross-border incursions may be an armed attack against them. So definitely also worth reconsidering. I definitely did not think that autonomous weapons and autonomous systems are not that smart. I thought about it all the time as systems that may be much smarter than humans, but I just tried to not to over-evaluate it. And whether autonomous machines can make smarter decisions than humans, I'm maybe sometimes. I'm not sure if I would agree with it on that's true in every case. I still think that there are some situations when machines are unable to. There are some factors that machines will be unable to take decision into account, that will be unable to take the right decision and take all these circumstances into account. But when it comes to the sole military assessment of military of the situation. Perhaps that is definitely true, but yes, and the question of proportionality. Now I think, how could I skip it? Thank you very much, Ido. I really appreciate it.
With pleasure. Fabiano?
So do you have any thoughts on the use of automated self-defense to a cyber attack using AI? So for instance, decisive sort of dead hand counterattack in response to something like last year's cyber attack on US infrastructure. And by decisive, perhaps I mean something that could actually give the US clear and obvious control over much of the attacker's infrastructure, which last year attacker didn't seem to have. And I do put an emphasis on clear and obvious here. It seems that many of the future wars are likely to be cyber wars, and even more so if AI continues to be advanced and implemented. So these will be non-conventional wars using non-conventional weapons instead of conventional wars using non-conventional weapons. And what are your thoughts on those kinds of wars or conflicts? Maybe some people wouldn't even call those wars. And I think one question I have is, how could we classify this as use of force? Because you would think that would clearly be more powerful and net risky to human lives than attempting a small invasion. So if a country has control over your even 10% of your vital infrastructure, there is a risk that, I don't know, even malfunction, if it does something wrong and suddenly all your power lines or even nuclear reactors shut down, and that's extremely risky. Yet it seems like nobody would classify that a use of force right now.
Well, I think it still doesn't cross the, I don't want to say definition of the use of force, because there's no such thing, but I would say that it still goes along the use of force from Article 2.4, because there are still humans behind it, and these are the humans who invented such weapons. They made it function. They gave the weapon parameters and data to work, as also Ido said. And I think that the use of force is still engaged, and I don't know if the use of autonomous weapons is really much more dangerous than use of the conventional or more conventional type of weapons. As we talked, actually, it seems that they may take more smarter decisions than humans when it comes to the use of means of reaction. They may also have they may also be programmed with some information how to distinguish between combatants and civilians. So it's also an additional asset. Yes, of course, there always may be a breakdown and there always may be a mistake, but it's not only the problem of autonomous weapons. There were many examples in the past where where, for instance, the militaries were supposed to target some military facilities, but out of 20 missiles, only 5 targeted really the military facilities, and the rest, the 15 rest, was actually struck into the civilian houses. So this is not only the question of autonomous weapons, but I wouldn't consider them more dangerous than the weapons operating on a regular basis by humans.
Now, Leah.
Thanks. So I'm going to talk about necessity instead of proportionality, only because I don't think anything you've written here is wrong. I just think that you may have overlooked the almost rebuttable presumption that exists that once an armed attack occurs, use of force to repel the attack, the necessity requirement is met. And there's a bunch of writing on this. I Adil hack has a good kind of primer called necessity and proportionality, that yes, the last resort requirement exists, but up until the point that an attacker has attacked you. Once an attack has occurred, you're not required to try and diplomatically engage with a state who's already proven that they are not interested in diplomatic negotiations, for example. So, and I think that that's important because if you're talking about an automatic defensive weapon, you're most likely, and Iron Ring was raised, other defensive weapons. We're talking about something that responds to an attack, most likely, rather than a preparation for an attack. So I think while your comments about whether it's the last resort and it's people sitting around in a boardroom makes sense, if an attack has not yet occurred, if an attack has occurred, you have an autonomous weapon responding. I think the necessity requirement is made out.
Thank you. I didn't say it in my presentation, but it's in my paper that I made this comment that, of course, it is this criterion of necessity does not always require you to make this, to try to use these peaceful measures, because nobody asks a state to show the second cheek for a slap, and you can always start right away to take the military measures if there is evidently that there is no other alternative that the military response, and there is no other way to stop an armed attack, and that's what the self-defense is for. In my presentation, I just wanted to say that the use of force is ultima ratio, in a sense that if there is a chance to repel an armed attack in non-forcible means, you are obliged to try it. But if there is no other alternative and the existence of a state to call the ICJ is endangered, of course, you don't have to go firstly through non-forcible measures. You may start with the armed response right away.
Yes, thanks. And I was taking that from your paper. I just thought that I think it would be more clear. It would be easier if you clarified that the interpretation of Article 51 is that you have this right once an armed attack occurs. It would it looks like you missed something in the way that your paper is currently written. You clearly know what you're talking about. So I would just include that in your paper to show the reader that you've got it.
Okay, I definitely will. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So now it's my turn, as our moderator reminded me in the chat. So I have two comments. One is rather unconventional. When I was reading your paper, I thought about last year or even a year before a problem at JESAP. I don't know if you know what was it about, or any one of you was involved. And there was this lethal autonomous weapon system imagined, and it was also in the context of Bellum. So I was thinking that maybe in context of probable problems with a law interpretation, that could be a nice starter also, or something to read and maybe develop on. And the other is I would like to comment on because I wrote my PhD on those weapons, but I'm not an expert in Bellum, and I didn't devote, I think, a single page to that problem. But what you said somehow inspired me for this raised hand, that you think that autonomous weapons cannot be better than human. And I'm thinking, where you how you came to that conclusion? Because from my analysis, it seems that once the technological level is reached, we can actually just discuss in ethical terms whether we want to transfer this kind of decision to machines, because humans are no better at making mistakes, and law accepts those mistakes, as we discussed before at Magda's presentation. So why would we say that those weapons are more dangerous those imagined weapons are more dangerous than humans? That's my question for you.
When it comes to the Jessup, yes, I know this case. I was the judge at that audition, so I know it very well. And but I didn't want to mention it because it seems a little bit silly for me to start with the Jessup imaginary case to start it with it in my paper. But when it comes to your second question, as I said in my presentation and as I wrote in my paper, I meant that there are certain decisions, especially when it comes to the criterion of necessity, when perhaps the decision of the autonomous weapon system would be to repel or to halt an armed attack with the use of military measures, while maybe humans could decide to find a way to halt or to repel and to halt an armed attack or to halt further military tensions with the use of peaceful measures. Maybe it would be possible, and the machine would not take such a decision because it is a weapon. It is programmed to use force, and humans can always sit down for negotiations or at least consider such an option. While for machine, it would be less probable. And I definitely didn't say that that autonomous systems are more dangerous than weapons. I said that both autonomous weapons and humans are doing their mistakes, answering Fabiana's question. And equally, in both cases, the mistakes may happen and they may be equally dangerous. So I wouldn't say that one or another is more dangerous than the other, but I also wouldn't dare to say that humans are smarter than machines or machines are smarter than humans. It is always case by case evaluation for me.
Thank you. Zeno?
As I understood, your whole paper was about the autonomous defense systems. So you did not intend to cover those autonomous weapons which are designed to attack. And this is why I got a bit confused on the part where you discussed this these preventive war cases when the state decides to prevent an attack, so attacking before the other attacker. And this was the point when I did not really understood why autonomous defense systems could be used here, because if I understand correctly, these autonomous defense systems can be used against missiles or airstrikes, but I don't really see how can they be used for preventive wars, for instance.
Anticipatory self-defense, as the term goes itself, it is a type of self-defense that is used when a state sees that there is the armed attack has not been launched yet, but there is a immediate, let's say that there is immediate threat of an armed attack. The armed attack may start in a minute, but it has not started yet. And the state decided it will not wait until the moment the armed attack against it will start, but it decides to strike first, to not let the armed attack even start against it. That's why we call it anticipatory self-defense. And that's why I included it. And I meant the situation like, for instance, the autonomous system will recognize that there is the move of a large amount of soldiers next to the state border, or that there are missiles directing the state, or maybe this is not a good example because that would be already the regular self-defense. But there are certain tangible preparations for the armed attack that may start any moment against the state, and it decides to fire a missile, take any other armed action that will prevent the armed attack from even starting against the state. That's why I included it, because that is for me somehow the core of the anticipatory self-defense.
Yeah, I understand it from that point. I just don't see the role of autonomous weapon systems in this case. So I understand that an autonomous weapon can detect a threat when, for instance, a missile is already fired, and it can detect and it can shoot it. But how can an autonomous weapon system detect the possibility of attacking? So how can it see the possible targets if they are just deployed to the frontier or to the borders? So how can an autonomous weapon system be applied before the attack actually commenced? So I don't see how an autonomous weapon system can even be used in a preventive war or an anticipatory war.
For instance, you have satellites that monitor the movement of foreign military forces next to the state's borders, and if they recognize that there is the move of huge units of army next to the state's borders, and the autonomous weapon system will recognize such, will get such information and will recognize as a threat to the state, because it will be pre-programmed to recognize something like that as a threat to a state. It may fire a missile to I don't know, destroy the military facilities next to the border that will enable the further preparations for the attack.
Yeah, just one addition to this, and I will finish this. So, for instance, in this case, to put it into present politics, in case of Taiwan and China, could Taiwan use an autonomous weapon system against Chinese troops who protest by going through the airspace of Taiwan? So can it mean that an autonomous weapon system, for instance, be applied? And can it mean that it will be used against Chinese troops?
When they are in the Taiwan Strait, you mean?
Oh, yeah. So how an autonomous weapon system could find the difference between a typical form of aggression and between provocation?
Well, this is another question, and this is the question of how to pre-program autonomous weapons, and actually whether we consider how it distinguishes between different types of information it receives. So this is a very different type of question, and it's more submits to the problem of technology and technicalities than law, I think. But in general, I think that autonomous weapons are able to be programmed to somehow maybe distinguish between it. But in that case, I'm unable to answer the technological side of it and whether how parameters can be set to distinguish between it. But the question is very good.
Okay, I think we've answered all the questions, and you read all the comments that we've had. So I want to thank you, Agata, for a very, very interesting presentation. I want to thank again Yahli Shereshevsky for being the respondent for that presentation. And I actually look forward to read the final outcome of that, because you see how many interesting questions it raised on the ability of autonomous weapons and on the both attribution and responsibility, and the question of both necessity and proportionality, and the question of whether or not it's being used for self-defense, defensively or aggressively towards from attack or towards the enemy. So there are a lot of interesting questions. By the way, one that I'm not asking you to address it right now, but there are always the question of self-defense against non-state actors, which is also a different level and a different level of complexity that might be addressed in the context of the questions of self-defense.
I used to have the project on armed non-state actors, so I went through it all, so I know what you're talking about.
So that's it. I think we're gonna conclude this session, and again invite everyone who watches this presentation to either get in touch with us with regard to further questions that you might have, or just to enjoy and watch other presentations from this workshop available on our YouTube channel. So thank you very much.